Do you think this is useful? Can you see this happening in your country? And if so, who would do it? Or did you see some glaring omissions in this kind of list of questions? Who wants to start? Anyone? Well, let's ask our presenters. Oh, there is someone. Great, fantastic.
Hello, Ian Chalmers, James Lind Initiative. I'd like to ask two questions, if I may. One to all the members of the panel, and one specifically to Anna. So, as far as I remember, the first meeting that I went to concerned about fraud and fabrication of data must have been at least 10 years ago. It was in the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, and there were estimates of how often fraud and fabrication were in the literature. I seem to remember that the figure of 1% was around. And I was one of, I think, a couple of people who asked the question, why isn't failure to publish regarded as misconduct in this world of people that are talking about research integrity? We have good statistics on that. We know that about half of the clinical trials that should be published aren't published, yet somehow it's sort of overlooked as an issue by those people who profess an interest in research integrity. So the first question to all of the members of the panel is, did you consider looking at the national statistics for failure to publish registered research? Because I believe that is research misconduct. The second question, specifically to Anna, is that one of the few contributions I've made to the issue of fabrication and fraud was a paper published in the BMJ about a specific Croatian individual, Asim Kujak, which clearly established that he had fraudulently fabricated data. It also made the point that, in fact, the discovery that this has occurred had come through doing systematic review and looking at all the particular individual reports on addressing a particular question, one of which was his. And comparing those, it was quite easy to see how he had plagiarized large tracts of text from a completely different article done by people in a different country. Now, the University of Zagreb, which is where he was appointed at the time, was very proud of this man because he had a big international reputation for ultrasound and obstetrics. And they were outraged that I had suggested that they might investigate the record of this man. The consequence of that, and this is what I'd like Anna's comments on, was that several completely innocent people in Croatia were attacked, and that the person who had been guilty of the crimes has moved from strength to strength. I think he's now the president of the University of Dubrovnik. I know that some attempts had been made to bring a legal process against those people who were attacked. I'd just like to know if there's been any move on in that story. It's an example of the failure of academia within a country. I bet you it's not the only one, which actually, as I say, resulted in innocent people getting attacked and in some senses having to move universities, and guilty people continuing to revel in public, within his own public academia, adoration.
Okay, I'll just answer this. It will be it can be a movie, a Cold War, KGB movie, but it is true that in academia it's very difficult when power games are involved. Yes, both my husband and I, as editors of a Croatian medical journal, were accused that we wrote Ian's paper for BMJ and not him to hurt the professor. We were both put forward for disciplinary actions. I was accused of plagiarizing a student textbook in anatomy, which was cleared by the national body for research ethics in my country. My husband was requested to go psychiatric evaluation, whether he's sane in these whistleblowing and so on and so on. But I would like to, put it behind and say that lessons have been learned. I mean, it's a very long-term process of restructuring and reforming any country. I don't think it's specific for Croatia. I think that every country has its scandals. But, I think that there is a move on. Maybe not in this case, but I think the awareness now is greater. Sometimes it's overreacting, like in the case of our minister and many other cases. Now everybody claims that everybody else has plagiarized. If they publish a book from their PhD thesis, they are accused of plagiarism and so on and so on. So you have this kind of overreaction. But I think that in time, especially if there is a consistent movement at European level, at global level, towards this baseline setting and comparison, not to say who is better and who is worse, but to see where I am in this community are very important.
Just to briefly answer Ian's first question about did we consider selective reporting, the short answer is no. One advantage I could see of these report cards is identifying uncertainty or identifying areas where research would be interesting. So I'd like to stress that all I did was, well, and with help, pull things that were available off the computer. To look at national levels of under-reporting of research would take some actual research to be done. Wouldn't that be interesting? Maybe that's something we ought to look at, and it would help us to identify the need and then the funding to actually do it. But this was on the information that was already available, not, as far as I'm aware, that hasn't been looked at on a national level to make comparisons.
Just to make the point, it should be possible now quite easily with Trials Tracker.
Yes, and I think that's something we might actually add as an outcome measure in our report card, if that's easily doable. Anyone else wants to comment on that from the panel?
My short answer would also be no, not because it's not important, and I think it should be done, but because I think it was outside the scope of this task of making a country card, a report card at this time, reporting on the processes and the outcomes like we have. So it's an interesting question, but we did not see that as within the scope of this task.
Yeah, good. Other questions, other comments?
May I?
Of course.
Actually, I have to say 2 years ago, I had no idea where this could get to, but now I understand a little bit more. We are doing a lot of
Could you tell everyone who you are?
Yeah,
please?
my name is Nicole Vöger. I'm chair of the European Network of Research Integrity Offices, which is already the introduction into, we are also doing some kind of mapping at the moment within NRIO, and we had some similar ideas about summarizing facts and figures, but also going into our procedures and processes and so on. So actually we have a lot of questions, but we do not ask them all today. Some easier maybe. So you would think that you have to revise and review these kind of cards every year, probably. Yeah. And then I think, or we think, because we had the same experience, that it really depends on who is answering the question. So some of these, you know what I mean. Some might be, facts and figures is easier, but then there are some kind of things like opinions, and then you also said, I don't know that there is a strategy paper and so on. So maybe if you would ask the ministry, then they would have other papers and other documents and things like that. And the question we had in NRIO, can one person answer questions about all the universities and research institutions, how the maybe the training is somewhere mandatory. Maybe it's in 50% of the institutions we actually didn't know within NREO. And maybe to Zoe, do you think you would have different pictures if you would go to the single states in the United States?
Oh, single states. Yes, it's possible because, again, as we're looking at it, once you go down to a level closer to the universities, there may be more capacity to collect the information. For example, a state university would have that data as part of their own taxpayers, transparency sort of thing. So yes, that's a good idea too.
I just want to add that I think that when we said, we didn't know, that was our failure, that we didn't know about the existence of these documents. But I think one should look only for the documents that are in the public domain. I really don't care if a ministry has a document somewhere on a shelf and it's not available to the public. So I have tried to find all the information I have were from the publicly available sources that I tried to find. And that's another message to your network. I think that would be a great start if NREO could work on this and starting to develop this, because you're an organization and that's something that could be done. On another level, I see, for example, the accreditation procedures for research and higher education institutions as a way to see the situation and improve it, because you can have thematic accreditations. You can say, or maybe that could be your influence, that goes to the accreditation agency, higher education and research, and say, let's make a thematic accreditation in research integrity to see what we have there. At least it could be possible within the European system.
One quick thought. I think, Nicole, it's a very good point. Who has the authority to say these things? And some of the figures are presumably uncontroversial and they're easy to find. I think the advantage of publishing it, though, is if somebody disagrees, at least they can tell you. At least they can write in and say, actually, you've got it wrong. We've got twice as many universities or whatever, and you can find out what the source is. And at the moment, it's very difficult to get that information. And yeah, there may well be things wrong in my presentation, but at least having presented it, someone can point that out to me.
And I mean, maybe you're telling us this, but I just want to stress that as far as I am aware, your methodology is a survey, whereas this was, I've just charged these 4 individuals to go away and, find as much publicly available information as possible, or via their contacts, perhaps.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that, because as you saw, Anna was very open about information that was not available. We basically only cherry-picked the information that were available, but through open access sources, and we also have references in our report card to which sources we used, and the year and everything like that. But it became plainly obvious all the information that is not available, even in a rather open and transparent society as Norway. So that was one of the things we came away from. There is quite a lot of information that is not available. How do we make that available? And also being shamed for not being able to produce valid outcomes. That was quite an eye-opener, and a valid and very valuable experience from this task. We are now much more aware of the fact that we are not very clever when it comes to outcomes. Let's do something about it.
And I think this was also the idea, I should stress. I mean, we're using some of this methodology with some of our authors at the Lancet for report cards for, global under 5 child mortality. And part of it is also where some countries have just huge numbers of gaps in information, and then they see that and they say, oh, we better collect this information in the next year or 2, and then it's suddenly available. And that's another, really positive aspect of such a report card. Yes, please.
Well, yeah, I was trying to say that, so that makes it half. Bert Segers from the Flemish Commission on Research Integrity, also a member of NREO, European Network of Research Integrity Offices, and together with Nicole Veuger and Grace van Akel, responsible for this mapping exercise with the questionnaire. Of course, I am highly enthusiastic about the idea of country report cards. I think it has a lot of potential, also potential to harmonize. You said it's not meant to name and shame and blame, but when policymakers, albeit national rectors conferences or government, see, one, the gaps, but also that their country is quite underperforming with respect to the others, if you have some kind of a comparative overview, I think it has a great potential to empower nations, countries, to do better. So my question is about the output of this country report cards. For now, 2017, these 4 country report cards will be slideshows hosted on the World Conference Research Integrity website, right? What about in 2 years' time? How do you see, what could we do with these? How could we disseminate them? Do you see a format? Should it be public? How public? Should all of it be public? And so on. And I want to point out, if I may, a correction on what Anna said. NRIO is an organization, you said. Well, that's in fact not true. NRIO is a very informal network. Yeah. But the World Conference on Research Integrity, we learned yesterday, has become a foundation. Perhaps that opens up some possibilities, Rex, right? Research by the World Conference on Research Integrity?
Yes, thank you very much. Anyone wants to add to this from the panel?
If in 2 years we are at this same point, I would be terribly embarrassed to present what I did because we had no consistent methodology. And I found, okay, as you say, there were things that were available on the internet, but at the same time, there's a plethora of things that are available. So I thought, oh, should I use this index or that index? And so establishing some consistent measures, this is not my area of expertise at all. So I was randomly Googling in the middle of the night, which is now a verb, that's ridiculous. But it's for me, if in 2 years, it would be a fundamental step forward if there were even just a few consistent measures and then some methodology to producing report cards.
Thank you. Next question.
Yeah, so I think it's a super nice initiative. One concern was, yeah, the difference, the different level of details and methodology was, will have to be fixed. And also, I think it was a super nice also suggestion to host it on the website of the World Conferences. Why not? It's already out there. We all know about it. So I think it would be very nice. You need a place. And my question is also, what is your main target audience for the cards?
All stakeholders, I think.
Everybody.
All stakeholders in research. I think everybody would be interested in the integrity of what they fund, make policies of, oversee in whatever way. I think it's about research in general.
I've just had a thought that, because I have a great concern that if this sort of becomes too official, then we will get a government report and we'll get figures that perhaps we don't believe or all sorts of gaps and so on. Maybe we could make it a wiki which everybody can edit. So if you spot something wrong, then you can change it. And wouldn't that be interesting?
I could find problems with that because you can have, all kinds of political, things going in and changing and this and going in rounds. But something like all trials or the trial check, that there is a system of, or WRCI or WCRI foundation. I mean, there should be. Yeah, I don't think it should be from the government, from the officials, but there should be a consistent and unique methodology to do it for different countries.
Yes, and I just want to add, this is really just a very early pilot and sort of throwing it out there, where people just now can comment as you do, which is very, very helpful for us to think further. How can we take this forward? Where can we take this forward? And, who should be carrying on doing this? That's another big question I would have. Yes, I agree. Ideally, we have annual updates, but that's quite cumbersome, but we need to get to that as well. Yes, please.
So this is Lynn Horn from University of Cape Town, bringing an African perspective to this. So the first point that I wanted to make was separating out research ethics and research integrity. And I think if this is going to be a useful tool within an African perspective, that's really important, because over the last long decade or so, there's been a huge amount of capacity development in terms of research ethics on the African continent. But there has, if one thinks of that as sort of the process is happening up to the point the research is approved, but the systems to support research integrity, which is what happens once, you know, clinical trials and various things are implemented, are really just absent at an institutional level. So I think that and especially listening to yours, you know, that sort of conflating research ethics, it's fine, but I think it really does need to be, otherwise I feel that there will be a lot of emphasis placed on the strength in research ethics, which allows African countries to then overstep the actual gaps in the research integrity systems and support. So that is the one. And then just, I think, picking up on, I think it was what Liz said, that if this becomes too much of something that a country would do, it could just become an exercise in showing that we're okay, you know, and so it really if it's going to become in a template form, it really needs to be structured in a way to bring out those gaps.
Thank you very much. Espen, do you want to comment on the, you know, conflation between research ethics and research integrity, because it's a peculiar thing.
Yeah, we have just chosen not to put up any major walls between ethics and integrity, and our system works for both. Okay, we have one commission for misconduct, but all of our system is really working to promote good ethics and research integrity. So I wouldn't be able to do that exercise for you. When talking about the future of the report cards, and if we should update them manually or not, I think that would be a rather futile exercise if no other countries are going to produce any report cards, like having us move forward every year. What would that contribute?
I want to see 185, or how many countries are there in the world? Anyway, report cards in 2 years' time. So just out of interest, who is inspired to go back to their country and think about a report card? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And who would like to ask one of us how much time it took?
No, but I think, seriously, I think it's something we should all think further about, because I do think it's an enormously useful, you know, exercise. And I've learned something about the UK today where I thought, oh, I knew everything, but I didn't, you know. And I think in doing this, but perhaps we can go through each one of you a last comment on this before we have to close. You know, we have one more question? Yeah. Quick one?
Yes. Not
if
question,
I can just
but remark.
Okay, just I want to say, you know, I give each of you then a last word, because I got the impression that you yourself also learned a lot about your own country by even doing that. But please, your remark.
Gerlinde Sponholz, I'm mainly teaching in Germany, good scientific practice, and we often have also international students. And for us, we have to do this work often at the beginning of a workshop to collect the data about the countries the students are coming from. And for us, it would be very nice to have such cards.
Excellent. Yes, I think we agree all that they would be very useful. Now we need to get down to the nitty-gritty, how to do it, who is doing it, and how many more countries can we, you know, inspire to do this, to present in Hong Kong in 2 years' time. Okay, last comment from each of you, please.
Yeah, I will have a last comment, but I will first answer the question about research integrity and research ethics. It's very difficult sometimes to say, okay, this is where the one ends and when the other begins. And it would be interesting to see the results of a Printager project that is under Horizon 2020. They're also looking into normative aspect of responsible conduct of research, you know, how difficult it is to define good and how difficult it is to define bad, you know, misconduct versus responsible conduct of research. So it will also help and inform this activity about, you know, what to look for in many ways. And if you want a final question. I do look forward to WCRI Foundation. We had a session where we also talked about research on research integrity and what we have, and we see that we need more. So maybe there will be foundation for research on this. Maybe, you know, some countries or some institutions or publishers would be interested in providing funds through the foundation for this and for other activities. We have networks of already of research integrity offices in Europe and probably in other countries, in other regions. So this is a start, and I think that the World Conference for Research Integrity is a place to get them together.
Thank you, Anna. Liz?
Just one point. I think we do need transparency in this initiative, and my idea of a wiki, which perhaps is a little crazy, could work as long as there are links to where do you get the data from. So as long as you can show where you got it from, then it's sort of legitimate. And I do think that would help to share it, because somebody may have that information and another person doesn't. And so I would think about that, but we do have to cite our sources, say where the information comes from.
Very quick response.
As a Wikipedian myself, wiki is like research. You cannot make anonymous contributions, and you have to cite where you have everything from. Yeah. So I think wiki is possible.
Okay, to be discussed further. Thank you. Zoe?
My last thought would simply be that it's critical to try to identify some sort of methodology. Again, repeating what I said before, because rather than just say how many more countries wish to do it, it's fantastic if people do, but perhaps working with people who have the relevant expertise would be really important at this stage.
Thank you. And Espen?
I think it has been a worthwhile experience, and we certainly have learned something from the experience. I would have liked to do it again, if I was asked. But updating it next year, I'm not so sure about, because basically the most interesting information provided here is actually on the systems and the processes and the outcomes, and not just the statistical, you know, how many more Norwegians we have next year. Mm-hmm. Doesn't make too much of a difference in this context. But we will focus on the outcomes, and we are part of a major survey who's going to tell us a lot more about the status of research integrity in Norway. It's 20 years since it's been done. Mm-hmm. And it's about time to do it again. And we need to do things like that more often in order to check out if our measures are working, if our systems are doing any good, and not just have to list our publications as the outcomes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. And please join me all to sort of thank our panel and our presenters here.
And thank you, Sabine, for inspiring the idea.